Hi everybody, this is Bruce Dancis for the Three Arrows Film Committee. Today I'll be introducing one of my favorite comedies, Monty Python's Life of Brian, which came out in 1979. Monty Python's Flying Circus, the path-breaking TV show, began on the BBC in 1969. Ironically, this is the same time when another famous troupe, the Beatles, were in the process that was long and arduous of breaking up. And the reason I mention this is that at the time, George Harrison was quoted as saying, "The only way I can get out of bed every day is because of Monty Python." He loved the show, and he later played a major role in getting this film made. Anyway, Monty Python was made up of 6 very unique characters, actors and writers. They all wrote their own stuff and they performed it. Michael Palin and Terry Jones met as undergraduates at Oxford, performed in theater there and did sketch comedy, and later became a writing partnership. Same for John Cleese and Graham Chapman, except they were undergraduates at Cambridge, where they started working together and continued working throughout the entire history, of Monty Python. Eric Idle also went to Cambridge, but he was somewhat younger than the others, and he tended to write his own parts by himself. And rounding out the troupe was Terry Gilliam, the only non-Brit in the group. He was from Minnesota, and what he contributed was a very unique and serialistic brand of animation that became a trademark of Monty Python's Flying Circus and their subsequent movies. As a TV show on the BBC, Monty Python's Flying Circus began slowly but gradually built a huge and very fanatically supportive audience. They ended up making 5 series or seasons between 1969 and 1974. In the United States, Monty Python's Flying Circus didn't debut until 1974 when PBS ran the first 3 series, and it was an immediate hit here. For those who remember, Monty Python was famous for its going after the unctuous, the powerful, the pompous, and basically took a no-holds-barred approach to attacking sacred cows. Some of its most famous sketches included The Dead Parrot, Nudge Nudge, The Spanish Inquisition, The Lumberjack Song, and the famous Ministry of Silly Walks. Government bureaucracy was also one of their favorite targets. After they finished the last season in 1974, they decided to make movies. And the first film they chose to do, written by themselves and directed by the 2 Terrys, Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam, was Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It was made on a very low budget and became a huge international hit and basically set up the Pythons financially for life. The Holy Grail was a send-up of the King Arthur legend. So it's a film set in the medieval era. It includes, damsels in distress, brave and not so brave knights. Generally, you can never watch one of those King Arthur kind of movies again after you've seen The Holy Grail. While they were on a publicity tour for it, they were talking about what they might do next, and Eric Idle popped up with the idea, how about Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory? And the members thought that was hilarious. Over the years, as they narrowed down the concept and began to flesh it out and write some parts of it, the story changed a bit. Titles became The Gospel According to St. Brian, Brian of Nazareth, as the plot evolved from a parody of Jesus Christ to something that was both less blasphemous, at least according to the Pythons, and less dangerous to produce. So that it was no longer about Jesus. Now, Jesus does appear in the life of Brian, but it's about a different person, Brian Cohen, who is mistaken to be a Messiah by his followers he does not want and does not need, and he pays a price for this. It's never explicitly critical of the Bible or Christ's teachings, but rather the interpretation of his life and teaching by his followers. In this way, it's a send-up of both the biblical films like The Greatest Story Ever Told, Roman epics that discuss the birth of Christ, such as Quo Vadis or Ben-Hur, and even the Roman gladiator revolutionary film Spartacus, which gets a hilarious send-up towards the end of the movie. They decided to film Life of Brian in Tunisia, which was both inexpensive, had a warm climate, had Roman ruins, some of which they could use, had a landscape somewhat like the Middle East, but most importantly, was a place where Franco Zeffirelli had, in the previous year, made a Jesus of Nazareth, and he had left behind major sets and costumes, and the Pythons were able to use all of those, which made it a lot less expensive to make. Around 4 days before the crew and the cast was going to move to Tunisia for a 2-month shoot, EMI, the distributor of the film that had been eagerly in favor of it and agreed to take it on, decided they were no longer going to make it. According to the stories that I've read, the head of EMI had never bothered to read the script and finally did so and discovered, no, we can't run this, it's blasphemous, and he pulled the plug on the movie. So the Pythons were desperate to come up with money to finance it, and they found it in the form of, in the person of Eric Idle's good friend, George Harrison, the ex-Beatle. During the 70s, Harrison and Idle had worked together on a number of projects. Idle had directed several of Harrison's videos, music videos, as a solo artist in the mid-70s. Harrison appears in the Ruddles, which was a Idle produced and starring in parody, very gentle parody of the Beatles, and they were very good friends. And when Harrison heard about this dilemma, he said, this is a movie I really want to see, and he came up with, through some financial maneuvers, $4 million, which he gave to the Pythons, and they were able to make the film. The film also started Harrison's career as a movie producer. It was the first film made by Handmade Films, which went on to make such films as With Nail and Eye, Nuns on the Run, a bunch of serious movies, a bunch of comedies, and became a major player in British movie making. Anyway, with the script, with the money on hand, they were able to proceed to Tunisia. Terry Jones by himself was directing the film. He also played Brian's mother. Graham Chapman was starred as Brian Cohen, just as he had starred as King Arthur. Chapman was particularly good at playing earnest, sometimes befuddled, but always straightforward, straight man amid all the chaos going on around him. And chaos it is. All of the other Pythons, they play about 40 different roles. John Cleese, who's always great at making fun of authority figures, is great as a Roman centurion, among other roles. Michael Palin delivers an amazing performance as Pontius Pilate. And all of them are multiple characters. There are even a couple of cameos, one by George Harrison, one by Spike Mulligan, whose Goon Show with Peter Sellers had been one of the big influences on the Pythons, say along with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, and the Beatles' own movies like Help and A Hard Day's Night when they first started. The opening titles and an amazing sequence in the middle of the film is provided by Terry Gilliam. It gives the movie an epic look, which is wonderful. There are certain trademarks of Monty Python's Flying Circus that show up in Life of Brian. One is cross-dressing. You may remember, if you were a fan of the Flying Circus, they would often dress up in drag. I remember a show where they played a women's auxiliary club that was going to reenact the Battle of Hastings, and they did it by dressing up as middle-aged women and hitting each other over the head with purses and rolling in the mud. Some people found that very funny, and I admit that I did at the time. And in this movie, we see the first example that I know of cross-dressing, where the male actors dressed as women then dress up as men in order to get around some rules barring women from participating in certain things that were going on. Again, they make fun of the authority figures, particularly Roman centurions, Pontius Pilate, some of the Jewish elders, and anyone who is lording it over the people beneath them. They poke fun at blind faith and the Bible stories, and not so much the teachings of Jesus Christ, but the way that it's been misinterpreted and misused by his adherents over the ages, over the years. They make fun of revolutionary organizations seeking to overthrow the Romans. Britain in the 1970s saw a proliferation of Marxist-Leninist groups, of Leninists, Maoists, Trotskyists, and others. And the Pythons, who were sort of on the liberal left, thought this was crazy and funny, and they translate that kind of sectarianism to the early ADs. They also show how funny and dirty and smelly and awful life was for ordinary people. This is not a cleaned up Judea. This is down and dirty, and it looks it, and it's very, very funny. And as always, Monty Python uses funny accents, including lisps, speech impediments, and things like that, which are sometimes hard to watch. I remember when I first saw this, I just knocked out by it. I thought it was great and very funny, and now I'm not so sure, but it's certainly worth discussing. Now, how was Life of Brian received? As expected, there were people who viewed it as blasphemous and heretical and all that. It opened first in the United States because the Pythons thought we'd less likely have controversy over this in the United States. And of course, they were wrong about that because some on the religious right, born-again Christian groups, were very opposed to it, thought it was blasphemous, thought it should be banned and boycotted. They were joined by some conservative Catholics and even some Jewish rabbis who opposed it. I think they opposed the use of prayer shawls in the movie. But as usual, when there are pickets like this, it ended up getting more publicity for the film, and the film did great box office in the United States. Now, when it opened in England a few months later, in the fall of 1979, there was a different problem facing the Pythons. There was a group that existed, a Christian group called the Festival of Light. Or the Festival of Light. And they had waged a successful campaign to get a British gay magazine called Gay News fined for blasphemy, for running an article that they said blasphemed Jesus Christ. Despite the efforts of civil libertarians, the magazine lost. So the Pythons were ready to fight another battle, and their lawyer was John Mortimer, who's famous for writing the Rumpole of the Bailey TV show. Anyway, they succeeded in getting approval from the British Board of Censors. They were allowed to show it to anyone over 12. This didn't prevent certain localities from banning the film, but if it was banned in one town, it would often be available in the next town. And again, the banning and all the publicity around that by local town councils ended up enhancing the popularity of the film. Life of Brian was banned in South Africa, not surprisingly. It was banned for 8 years in Ireland, again, not surprisingly, given the times. But surprisingly, it was banned for 1 year in Norway, which led the Pythons in their ads in neighboring Sweden to say, so funny, it was banned in Norway. But again, the movie did tremendously well. It cost $4 million to make, and it took in over $20 million at the box office, which in 1979 money was a lot. It was a huge hit. It was the fourth biggest film in Britain all year. It was the most popular British film in America during that year. And now, and more recently, it has made many top 10 lists or best ever lists by magazines, film institutes, and all that as one of the best comedies ever made. So, some people have always viewed Monty Python, especially Life of Brian, as being daring, brave, or hilarious, but also sophomoric, crude, infantile, and in bad taste. And it's probably all of that. I tend to emphasize the first words there because I think it's very, very funny. But I look forward to you all getting a chance to watch it, and let's talk about it on Thursday night.